in that particular set. For you and I, it's just to wait and see exactly what would happen to development of Bitcoin right here in the country. Again, majority of Kenyans are already on that. In fact, in Africa, we are the leading. My name is Simba Kiage. You're just in time for Lookupbusiness. Today we speak on issues climate, and we do know exactly what is going on in the country. Over 20 counties, that's half of the country, is already battling drought. What can you do to achieve climate justice? From a storytelling perspective, have we told a lot of stories about climate so that we can start impacting what we're seeing around in as far as climate change is concerned? That coming up shortly. For now, let's cross over to the news desk and see exactly what it is that we have for you in terms of the biggest business headlines that you're moving on today. The Central Bank of Kenya has announced that out of the 288 applications for digital lending licenses in the country, it has so far given only 10 lenders the green light to operate. The regulator now says that any digital lender in the country that is still conducting business without applying for the license as of September 17th, 2022, is operating in contravention of the Banking Act and should stop immediately. Erin John Mukora with that story.
CBK has also announced that the process of approval of the rest of the applicants is still ongoing and urged the lenders who are yet to submit requisite documentation to do so to help speed up the process. The Central Bank of Kenya Amendment Act of 2021 became effective on December 23rd, 2021 and provided the Central Bank of Kenya with the powers to license and oversight the previously unregulated digital credit providers. The Act will, among other issues, oversight the lenders on the modalities put on place for the confidentiality of the customers. It will also look into matters licensing, with majority of Kenyans complaining they had no place for physical contact when need arises. The Act will now force the lenders to have at least one physical office as a place of business, with the books of the digital lenders finally open to the CBK. Concerns of money laundering will also be investigated easily by the CBK. Lastly, the Act will touch on the critical area of consumer protection, with majority of the lenders accused of using predatory means to collect debt, with credit information also a critical area that the CBK will oversight, with consumers complaining about the lack of proper information before borrowing. So far, as the rest of the 278 lenders are still waiting for the approval from the Central Bank of Kenya, the ones that have been given a green light are as follows: Ceres Tech Limited, Get Cash Capital, Jijenge Credit, Giando Africa, Kweli Smart Solutions, Mwanzo Credit Limited, Sokohela Limited, Sevi Innovation, Reward Zero, and My Wage Pay Limited. Digital lenders in support of the regulation have earlier expressed confidence in the process, while remaining optimistic that the Central Bank of Kenya will not regulate their interest rates. Edwin John Mukora, Lookup TV.
Russia-Ukraine crisis has seen Kenya lose 25% of its horticulture market in the European Union. This, according to traders, is as a result of the rise in the cost of living due to the war that has affected the purchasing power of majority of European Union residents.
Generally, after COVID, or when COVID started, the industry collapsed completely. But some 2 or 3 months later, it picked up and it did well. And then, of course, earlier this year, this Russian invasion of Ukraine lost 20-25% of our market space. And that's slowly picking up again. You know, it's also good that you grow good quality, but you also want to go to a good market so you can find a premium price. Especially this Russian thing, fertilizers and chemicals have shot through the roof. And we even see it here in Kenya, where our petrol went up 20 shillings yesterday, except our oil price today is the same as the oil price was last October, November. So I hope the government looks at these figures, and when they're bringing in new stocks of oil, it should be at a cheaper price.
Well, from genetic part, what we can do about raising costs is increasing productivity. So more stamps per square meter. And that's where Metal Red is very strong. And of course, the product should be nice to raise the money when you sell it in the market. But that's what we can do from genetic part. As a breeder, well, the main challenge is, well, a variety needs to have the good traits for the grower. Should be productive, no diseases, should be good for transport, no damages, no botrytis, and also should be good for the end consumer. So we have three challenges as a breeder in one. And all those three, we need to meet the requirements.
The biggest challenge for us is to keep the production and to maintain the standard of production as our quantities increase.
Ni 1.2 or 3 million. Na mahindi 90 kg ni 4,000 shillings. Je, rais, kwa nini usiweke sheria yenye italinda bangi na tupande bangi tupeleke Israel kwa marafiki zako kule? Sababu Israel is your friends. Tupeleke Amerika. Nataka unipatie support, tuende tufanye benchmarking, tuende tuchukue right information before uhakikisha kwamba ibangi ihalalishwe, tuje tuelimishe watu wetu, tuje tuwafundishe, tuje tuwaelekeze jinsi wanaweza kutumia bangi katika njia nzuri. In Kilifi and coastal at large, we have many young people taking drugs, that is heroin and cocaine. But when we go for our interviews, these young people are deeply down. They are down and down and down, and they are suffering. We talked with United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and NASCOP to come up with measures on how we can support them. We thank them. Walikuja na methadone, that is medical assisted therapy, but it's expensive. Like now, there's no more methadone in Kilifi. Mateja wapati and young people are dying. Why can't we use cannabis sativa as a substitution therapy? Kwa nini tusitumie hii bangi kwa upande wa kusaidia wale mateja, instead ya kutumia heroin watumie bangi, na tuwashauri polepole mpaka wawache kabisa. Hii ndio ombi langu ya kwamba serikali yenye iliyoko ni serikali ya mahasla, na yeye mwenyewe amesema ya kwamba every hustle matters, na hii pia ni hustle.
Hii ni fresh. Ungeleta watu wengi hata kijana yake ameanza.
The Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization, KALRO, and Grain Business Institute, GBI, has urged farmers to turn to climate-smart technologies so as to fight the persistent drought and climate change. Speaking during the East Africa Grain Council Agribusiness EAGC media briefing in preparation of the Agribusiness Expo to be held on 5th October at KALRO, Kilifi County, Paula said emerging technological trends are significant in bridging the food gap in the country.
And this exhibition will give an opportunity to producers to come and learn about new technologies that they can use to mitigate against issues like climate change, the increase in cost of inputs like fertilizer and agrochemicals that is hitting the entire region and not just Kenya and the coast region.
We have several types of climate smart technologies that the farmers will be able to see, ranging from crops to livestock. When it comes to crops, we have climate smart technologies, crop varieties, cashew nut being one of our major crop within the area. We have developed some varieties which are also tolerant to drought, and they mature within two years. Within 2 years, we have the cashew nut.
Have to go all the way back to how they closed yesterday. Now, remember, really, when you're looking at the market indicators right now, we're beyond the election period. Now, things are back to normal. We did see the spike that we saw during or after the election period, really, when the market was quite liquid. That's exactly what we are investigating up to now. And that means that we're really going to look at the biggest counters in terms of exactly how this particular counters have been gaining, and that means that we have to look at what Safaricom has been doing, because just last week Safaricom was actually doing upwards of 19 million, 13 million, 7 million being their worst, especially on that week after the Supreme Court then announced that indeed they had validated the win for President William Ruto. All right, let's then go back and see exactly how we gained yesterday, and that means going back to what were the top gainers yesterday, and not so much really of a surprise when you're looking at this data that we have for you, because then you're going to look at that and see EGATS as one of those who are the top gainers, 7.17%, not so much of a surprise, because even the day before yesterday, we did see the market trending at that particular point as well. Umeme has been on this one as well, because if you look at Umeme, then you'll be looking at 7.90 cents, which is essentially 9.42% increase. Not so much of a surprise as well. We've been seeing Umeme as well really being among some of the top gainers since we did clear that election period, and that you will say has really been also supported by some of the gains that we saw in Kenyan and Kenya Power, with majority of investors asking themselves the questions: is it true that this energy quotas on NSE will give you something right now? All right, let's talk about Scan Group. Is one again that has been quite subdued really when we're talking about the gains, because Scan Group now comes in at 13 shillings, which is a big gain, by the way, to 9.17. That has been hot and cold as well with those announcements they gave us last year, in as much as the auditing of the final year results 2021 was concerned. Stanbic comes in at 94 now at 25. That is that's 97, sorry, at the 25, which are giving you 97.5% in that change as well. Fantastic. The only surprise would be Stanbic. All right, let's move on to what we have in the next list, which is losers, and not so much of a surprise really in this list, because then you will see the likes of Everready in that as well. We do have Kplc, and that's a big surprise, and we said this because if you look at Kplc then coming in from yesterday, now it is at what, 1.92. Yes, we said this, that rise that we saw throughout last week, which was fired by trading by Ndini Nyoro, is now out, because now they're back again, because 1.92 from what was the biggest average last week of 2 shillings per share. Now you will see exactly where they are. They are currently at 2.54. Again, we did expect that indeed that's exactly where they will be. Then when you're looking at that list again, you're going to see CIC Insurance as well. Not so much of a change, because then you're talking about 3.81 on the negative. That's not so good as well for that particular stock. And Everready, not so much of a surprise. By the way, 73 cents now representing 8.75%. Not so much of a change in that particular stock, because we do know so much subdued in terms of how they've been trading as well. Good. All right, let's move to the big boys then. We're talking about the biggest movers, as much as yesterday's trading is concerned. And really, when we're looking at the biggest movers then, we're going to look out for Safaricom, see exactly whether they've been hitting those particular numbers we've been getting. If we look at NCBA, again, 5.1 million shares. Again, knocking out Safaricom, and this is exactly what we said. If you look at this particular quarters now, this is a stock market that is sort of relaxed from the liquidity that we're experiencing just towards and after the pronouncement of those results by the Supreme Court. Now you'll see NCBA is trading at 5.1 million and has been really strong throughout. Kplc coming in at 2 million, 0.3 million, you will say, shares traded. Safaricom 1.3. EABL is back on a big boys list at 534,400. So the biggest surprise there is Safaricom is not headlining yesterday's trading anymore. NCBA is actually leading. Kplc still remaining with a positive sentiment, because, by the way, even as we're talking at them opening at 1.92, that is still way far ahead from what they should be doing, because from 160 to 1.92, you'll be saying that those shares are the ones that are really creating that increase. increase in that share price, EABL back on it at 534,400. That is a new boy this week, because indeed we did expect that then indeed our stock market would be representing what it should represent. Fine. That's how we look. So the bigger conversation today is climate justice, the role of storytelling. Now, we do know the climate really, and stories of climate change are really something that we have to talk about in this decade, if we're going to say in this century. Now, what we do know currently is that the country is facing drought. If you look at the counties then that we're talking about, 20 plus. By the way, when you're talking about 20 counties facing drought, that is almost half the country. Let's talk about the northern part of Kenya, which for 3 years, by the way, they've received minimal to no rainfall. But how many people know these stories? Are we talking enough? With majority of analysts saying that if you look at the way we are covering stories of climate change, we are sweeping some of these stories under the carpet. But we do know farming, very integral in our economy and GDP. But if we don't then speak so much about this, what happens to our economy and most importantly, our GDP? Let's speak to people who know. Let's then speak to people who are shouting about climate change. Once we come back, the theme, climate justice, the role of storytelling. Remember, you can be part of this conversation at Lookup TV across all your social media platforms. I am at Kiage Simba. Once we come back.
Yippee! Kamata plotting at 349K. Oh yes, for only 349,000 Kenyan shillings, you become a plot owner at the Great Oasis Gardens, Nanyuki. The Great Oasis Gardens, Nanyuki is located along the Nanyuki-Rumuruti Road, only 11 minutes from the City Mall and right opposite Mount Kenya Wildlife Estate. This is the best place to establish the getaway home that you have always dreamt about. For every 349,000 that you deposit or pay as installment towards any of Optiven's plot of land, you get 10K cash back instantly. Jaza basi twende Nanyuki. Bigger is indeed better.
All right, Simba, are you ready for this?
I'm ready for that.
Thank you very much for choosing to keep it right here. This is Lookup TV, and of course,
You're still watching The Morning Drift. My name is Simba Kiage. Can I get online?
remember to use the hashtag The Morning Drift. Don't go too far away.
Once we come back here
We'll be right.
on Lookup TV.
Michezo na wachezaji, matukio na matokeo uwanjani. Tumejifunga kibwebwe kukuletea mbwembwe, si mazungumzo ya kusisimua. Ndiyo maana safu ya spoti ipo hapa kwa ajili yako. ZFC! Nami hapa nahodha Robert Chacha, si suisui, na kuandalia kipindi bomba cha safu ya spoti kila siku ya Jumamosi kuanzia saa 7:30 hadi 9:30 ndani ya runinga nambari 1 ya michezo Lookup TV.
Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're watching us from. My name is Maki Wamboko, Sales Manager, Optiven Real Estate, and I'm here at our head office, Absa Towers, located at Reuters Street. Today, I'm here to talk about our newest project, that is Great Oasis Gardens, Nanyuki, and it is located only 10 minutes drive from Cedar Mall. And in this project, we have proposed that we will be having a Gmc Entertainment Center. This will be a replica of what we have in Kitengela, Gmc Kitengela. We are also proposing a police post, so you are assured that security, once you invest here, security is good. And we are also proposing to have a playing ground. We are also going to have a community ground. So once you invest here, you don't have to worry about the security. The other things, among the things that we are doing, or the things that we have done already in Great Oasis Gardens, we have already done the marking fence, and the roads, the internal roads are already happening. We have started the maraming the road, and we are still in the process of doing the maraming of the internal roads. And we are also sinking a borehole so that we ensure that our investors in Great Oasis Gardens, Nanyuki, will not struggle with water. We are also going to elevate a water tower so that we have a constant supply of water in this project. And we also have a caretaker on site. The caretaker is on site, and he's there 24/7. And then we also have different sizes in this project. We are having 8, we are having quarters, we are having halves, and we are also having acres. One can buy in bulk, you can buy in big chunks, and that is why we are saying in Great Oasis Gardens, Nanyuki, we are saying that bigger is better. In this project, what you can invest in, you can invest in private schools, you can also do holiday homes, whereby you can do Airbnb, you can also do holiday homes, and then you start renting, and you can also build houses and sell. You can also do apartments in this area. You can also do supermarkets. You can also build a mall, and then you start renting. There is so much that you can do in this project because it is not controlled development. We are also located along Nanyuki Rumuruti Road, and this road is being proposed to be tarmacked by the government. So coming from Nanyuki, or coming from wherever you will be coming from, it will be very easy to access the project because it is touching the Nanyuki Rumuruti Road, which is going to be tarmacked by the government. My number is +254 722 355 107. Do not be left behind. Call that number. I will work with you. If you're in Kenya, give me a call. We go for the site visit. We select the project. We start the payment. If you're in diaspora, send a representative, and I will be delighted to work with you. And as we say here in Optiven, we shine because you make us shine. God bless you. Thank you.
The current situation in the country when it comes to drought really paints a picture to a bigger disaster that we as a country or as a continent have not really managed. You might hear that we're taking steps, but then are we there? Because for how long then are we going to have conversations around drought management, hunger? Because currently in the country, as we start to look at business today, we do know that 4 million Kenyans are facing hunger and starvation. But then you ask yourself the question, we as the media, do we shout about this as much as we should? Have you seen current news that are really talking about the current drought situation in the country? How many programs about climate change and justice do you actually get to watch in a day in your mainstream media? That's where the question begins then. So today, we're talking about climate justice, and we want to look into a very specific area, the role of storytelling. let me introduce the two beautiful guests who are joining us then to headline this conversation from that particular angle. We're joined by Sandra Subi, who's a visual and performing artist. Sandra, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How
Welcome
are you?
to Lookupbusiness.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you
to
very
have you
much.
around, isn't it? All right.
It's
We're
my
also
pleasure.
joined by Anna Gishuki, who's a communications and events curator. Anna, how are you doing?
I'm great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's lay further background then into this conversation, where we're looking at the role of storytelling in shaping the climate justice narrative for Africa. In the just concluded Climate Week for Africa conference in Gabon, participants outlined Africa's objectives for the upcoming COP 2027 in Egypt to unify and amplify the African voice to ensure action. Now, the reality is, though, that a lot has to be done amid calls for urgent action to safeguard the continent from climate change. Sandra, let me begin with you. You know, when we say the role of storytelling in climate change conversations, and then you introduce an artist into this conversation, even before we get to say exactly what your work around this has been, do you think that we need to use artists in as much as we can then to channel this conversation about climate change? Or we talk to the governments, all right, let the governments deal with it. For us, we live in it.
Yeah. Well, most definitely. Artists have been defined as the eye of society.
Yes.
We have this very good and very great privilege to have the opportunity to look at things and study what we might consider as our normal, you know?
Yes.
And from that derive particular directions or opportunities or ways of seeing and thinking. And I think therefore then the response to your answer would be yes, you should invite artists into this conversation, because what they then do is that power of storytelling. They allow you to have access to someone else's story or their own particular story, for example. I remember in one of the conversations with one of our climate activists in Kampala, Uganda, called Vanessa Nakate. She was really highlighting how many times when you have this very big COP, you know, setups there, you have these people speaking and sharing all these written things. And she was saying, but the role of us as activists, which is sort of what we switched up as artists and said artivism, is that we get to really share what's happening on ground.
Yes.
And that many times, when you really look at it and oversee the whole conversation of 1.2, we need to get to 1.5, so we are okay with 1.2, really becomes a thing where you are not really finding out what's happening to the people on ground. And many times as Africans, let me say as Kenyan, I'm Ugandan, as a Ugandan, we are really in the spaces where the people who are causing the least, you know, influence to this conversation are facing the most harm.
Yes.
And so I believe as artists, because I'm a visual and performing artist, we have these two very powerful tools, art and music. And really the role of what we do is really to tell the stories of the communities in which we are, of the things that we experience, of what we are seeing. And so for me, it has been a very interesting journey to learn what we are actually facing. I remember coming when I arrived yesterday, and the first conversation we had was with a gentleman called Willie, and he was driving me to where I was going to stay, and he said something. He said, do you know the weather in Kenya has changed? They told us that it's going to be cold up to August, but now we're entering October, and it's still happening.
Yes.
And for me, it was very powerful because it's almost like you pinch people, and they, even without knowing, they're speaking on the issue of climate change.
Yeah.
And that's very powerful. And I think more and more, what art does is that it gets it out of the, you know, it gets the story to a very personal level.
Yes.
And individualizes it, and that brings a lot of ownership, because then if you look at my plastic sculptures, let's say, you're thinking, I also take water, I also use these plastic bottles. What else can I why is she making this outfit? Why is she walking in public space with it? And so I think it becomes a very personal question that then raises ownership for this thing, and that I believe then becomes very communal, because the more individual this conversation becomes, the more it becomes something that I'm sharing with Anne, that I'm sharing with you as Elijah, and at the end of it all, even with the people that are watching right now, it really settles into, like, in my home, in my life, what how has climate justice or how has climate change affected me and those around me, and how can I be a person that's really affecting change towards climate justice.
Pretty much. I'll be coming to you, Sandra, on that as well. Anna, let me rope you into the conversation. I mean, I was speaking to Sandra off air, and she said, you know, when people talk about climate justice, it sounds something huge, like something that is on a personal conversation. For someone who wants to understand what climate justice is, how would you tell them what climate justice is? Let's begin from that.
What is climate justice? I would say it's definitely, we have a lot of really crucial things happening in the world right now. When you think about weather extremes, either it's very hot and very dry, like we saw this past summer in Europe, or it's flooding, like we've seen in India, or it's cold and dry, like we've seen here in Nairobi. Climate justice, I would say, is taking that stand as an individual, as a corporation, as a country, and saying, this is what we want, this is what we want to do. We don't want to, the things that are pulling down our climate, we're against that, we're standing up for that. That's what I would define climate justice as. Yeah.
And from your perspective as well, when we're talking about the upcoming COP27, you know, again, somebody was asked, who's COP27 and what we're talking about these climate events? Would you decipher for us why some of these events are quite important, especially when we're talking about climate change and justice for climate?
Right. I'd say when we come across these events like COP27 or Climate Story Lab Africa, which is coming up next week, I think the importance of those events is to really have these conversations with people on the ground. A lot of the time when you hear about climate conversations, you're hearing about people at the UN in New York, 5 countries sit down and decide what's happening with the whole world. I don't think that's very fair. I don't think that's a lot of justice. So these conferences like these bring that conversation down to the people here on the ground, people who actually get affected, the farmers who are actually finding it hard to reap a harvest, or the school children who can't go to school because of floods. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioning that as well, like this climate lab that is upcoming. I want us to talk about that just a little bit more. As an event organizer, and you want to bring people on board, or part and parcel, the ones who receive this first impact of climate change, what are we looking forward to seeing at a climate lab, and why are we going to see these people there?
So at the Climate Story Lab, we have some panels that we've curated with professionals in the energy field, in the farming field, people who do a lot of the deciphering of the big words and the big documents around climate justice. So they're going to be a part of the Climate Story Lab. But also, because it is a story lab, we're going to be including a lot of storytellers. We have a few filmmakers from Sierra Leone, from Benin. We have Sandra Subi here from Uganda. We have a very enterprising young lady from Kenya who's built a board game around climate justice. We're also going to be incorporating a lot of other artists. We have a fashion installation, a climate justice fashion installation we're going to have. We have performances, because these are the people who are here on the ground with us in Africa, who are actually doing something. They're not waiting to hear what those 5 countries in New York have decided before they feel like they can get up and do something or make their voices heard.
Pretty much. I'll be coming back to you on some of the stories we've actually been able to see over time. Sandra, again, the art of storytelling, I want to come back to that as well. You're an artist, by the way, you're not even Kenyan, but now there's an event that you're doing here in Kenya that's coming up as well. Does that make this conversation about climate a universal conversation? And do you think artists like you are the ones who can make this conversation universal? And just before we went on air, I did ask you, Sandra, that is that when it comes to entertainment, visual arts and performance, as I said, we've delinked artists from activism, you will say.
Yeah.
Does that climate activism make it easier for you as an artist to appeal? Because I know, Sandra, you may want to appeal to a lot of people. And so here is an artist talking about climate change.
Yeah.
Does that sort of put you in a different position than you would want?
That's a very good question. Let me see if I can break down what you asked. I think that most definitely, music and art are universal. I don't think whether you, like, it's almost like it's a language that we all speak. You don't have to, I don't know, you don't even have to add anything to it. As they are. So for me, I always say this as I have a privilege. It's a privilege, yeah, to be able to practice in both spaces. I have seen very much that, number one, for me, being able to speak about or to share the work that I've been doing in Uganda, and it's still relevant here, is a very big message in its own right. And I think that I can't claim to say, is it or isn't it, but I think the things that, the responses that I'm getting get to show that, because if I remember we were speaking with, and as I was coming, and I was talking about some of the material that I've used to make some of the wearable art that I make. And we would keep talking, it's like, yeah, we have that material here, you know? And I think that then this material allows for it's almost like you start the conversation, but even if you got out of it, it's almost like you almost highlighted something that people wanted to speak about, that wanted to respond to, and really just gave them an avenue to have that conversation in a way that wasn't, I was telling you before that sometimes when we speak on climate justice, it feels like a blame game, you know? Who did that, who did, you know? But as Anne said, it's that people are really facing this thing. Like, for Willie, as he was driving me, he's like, even as I entered, like, it's so cold, you know? And coming from a very warm Kampala, I'm just like, what is happening? And you know, already he has a response. He didn't have to read about it. He didn't have to be told about it. He's really experiencing it. And so I think that, yes, when you ask, it is universal. It is universal. And it is almost like a conversation from heart to heart. It is very individual. And many times when things are individual, when we come together and it's something we are all experiencing, it becomes very communal. And now it's crossing boundaries. I really, and yet even to that point, as Anne mentioned, we are not having enough conversations on climate justice, you know? And so I think that, yes, it is a universal tool. I also think that it's a very, if we had a lot more of it, there would be a lot more awareness, because as much as this is a very communal or something that we need to deal with, yes, there are people that make the decisions, but the people, the individuals have the power to influence the people that lead them. So if you allow them to put language or to be able to communicate what it is they're experiencing, I think that then that becomes very global. And if we had a song in Kenya, a song in Uganda, and you know, and all these songs are on platforms whereby people are listening and saying, yeah, in my song I sing something and say, speak up for your land, speak up for your future. We must take a stand. Each one playing their part, as one raising their voice. We need to go green and do more. But you know, it's in song. Let me try to sing it so that you see. Then it you know, it's like when I speak, you're like, okay, that conversation. When I sing it, you're like, so it says, speak up for the land. Speak up for your future. We must take a stand. Each one playing their part. As one raising their voice, we need to go green and do more. For this earth is our only home. Go green right now. Chidagala, chidagala. That's a Luganda word that says go green. Chetwagalo kulagula. And many times you move into these spaces, you sing this song, you're wearing the sculpture that you're wearing. And people really understand it. You know, and in a way you've almost removed the boundaries to knowledge. You've removed the boundaries to who should know, who should take a stand. And you know, this whole conversation sometimes of that's their role, not my role, you know. And I think it just makes it very individual, very personal. And it's really, as the artist saying, this is what I've seen, this is what I've experienced, this is what I'm doing about it. And inevitably, it's almost like, and it's like, oh, what can I do about it?
Yes.
You're like, what can you do about
Yes.
it? And at the end, we can't all make, like, you know, very individual steps, but at the end, they compound, you know? And so right now, we're on Look Up TV, and we're speaking to an audience of people, and they too are asking themselves, what can I do about it? That's because you're bringing what you can, she's bringing what you can. We have this Climate Story Lab that's bringing all these stories together that at the end, I believe, compound and speak to something deeper than, oh yeah, this thing is happening. Oh yeah. But more to, you know, this is my experience.
Yes.
And you might have experienced it too, but did not know that that's what you are experiencing. And I think that's the universal power of music and art.
Sandra, I'll be coming back to you then, because somebody would ask then, you know, you find yourself in this interesting space. Are you at a personal level find yourself championing for climate justice? And let me cross over to you as well. So you've got to recognize that all of us here are young people, and we're recognizing that indeed, if we're going to talk about climate justice, then it's got to be for us and for the future. Even the older guys are already out of this conversation, by the way. About this Climate Story Lab that you're going to have as well, are you specifically targeting young people? And over this period that you've been sampling these stories and saying, well, these are the stories that I think could motivate action. Have you seen any action from some of the stories that you've actually brought up through your events?
That's a very good question. So I came on to the Climate Story Lab this year.
Yes.
As a co-curator for their fashion installation. But I was on the periphery of last year's event, the 2021 event, and there were some stories that we highlighted then that we'll be talking about this year to see how far they've come. Aside from that, I'm the communications manager at an organization called DocuBox, and what we do is we support East African filmmakers to tell the stories they want to tell. One particular film that we supported is called Thank You for the Rain. It's about, it follows the protagonist and director. His name is Kisilu Musia, and he's just a regular farmer from Mutomo County, Mutomo in Kitui County. And the premise of the story is that he began filming his village when they faced, first of all, heavy drought and then heavy floods. And he began to tell his village mates, guys, this is climate change. And they were like, what's that? What's climate change? And as the story progresses, you see Kisilu ending up at COP23 in Paris, talking about there's my villages, people don't have water, people are dying, or animals are dying. This is my story from Kenya. I want to share my story. And from that film, now there was an earth dam that was built in his village. Yeah, that I think it waters about 100 families.
Yes.
So these stories do go forward, and they do create lasting impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which stories are you going to focus on mostly in this year's event? And you know, the copy stories of the effects of climate change. Like if you want now, and I mean, it will take a second for us to see the devastation that is happening at the northern part of Kenya. I mean, that's the story that is told.
Yeah.
And then, are you concerned on a personal level that these stories are not being told enough? Even right now in Kenya, there are concerns that some of the stories are getting swept under the carpet. We are not crying enough about climate justice in this country. Would you say that?
I would say that. I would say that there's definitely people like Sandra in the region, and when there's so many other Sandras even here in Kenya who are saying something about the climate justice, but I still think we have some ways to go in terms of how many are we telling this story.
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, but even just the individuals, even just you having us on the show, I think that's already a really big start.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right, Sandra, let's then talk about you now, because it's a personal conversation. I find you in a very interesting space. Here you are, you're not just performing entertainment, which you don't have to live by that code. You're in a place where you're talking about climate justice, climate change. Have you, in your personal level, found yourself as an activist right now? And what influence do you talk to me about in terms of the responses that you've got so far?
Wow, yes, I have found myself in that position. I think that when you start speaking about something that really touches people and is actually affecting them, you somehow, yes, do find. But I've also given myself to learn. I'm constantly saying that I am very aware of what's happening around me, and I am alert to be a learner, because, sometimes we think we know things, but we do not know, And I think for me, one of the great privileges of my practice is to be able to learn, to listen to others and learn, and many times incorporate what I'm learning into what I'm then creating. Yes, so I think it has somehow pushed me to look at that. We are here, and we're speaking. Most times you'd find artists in galleries showing our work, speaking about what has inspired us. And so it's very interesting that when what's inspiring you are some of these things. For me, it really also came from the material that I was using, and really the conversation for me was, as an artist, these things were available. They were here. Every day, like I walk just a little bit, there's a plastic bottle. I walk a bit, there's a plastic bag. And I started thinking, why aren't we using this as material? Why isn't this like a medium in which we work? And from starting to work with that, really started to be enlightened on why is this material there? Who actually puts it there? I think I also use it, and when I use it, what happens to it after that? And then the fact that it's not biodegradable, like consistently learning, and then learning that it's really becoming somehow like ingrained into our material culture. Someone actually mentioned that plastic is almost becoming like a god of materials, because wherever you go, there it is. And sometimes you can think, this material is here. It's always here. Yeah, it's framing our cameras. It's probably making some of our clothes. And we're just like, that's life. But no, I think it's important. And what is the role of the work that we are then doing with Climate Story Lab, and all this music and artivism and activism, as you called it, is that then you're really highlighting the issue, You're highlighting it in a very fluid, a very organic, a very true way that people are experiencing, and you're giving them the chance to respond and say, oh, is that what it is? I think when you say then, what responses have I got? For example, we are here and we are sharing a story from Kampala. That's a response, on a platform in Nairobi. I think that's very powerful. Pretty much. Because then that means it's something you're also facing. Number one, I have had moments when I go and I'm doing these processions and the children come because they're attracted with visually what are they seeing, But then they're also wondering, what is it about? How did you make it? You mean I can also make something? I do some sessions called Dream Labs where we really task the people in the community to collect whatever it is they have, and we come and repurpose it into something that will be of use in their home, in their lives, a symbol, a functional object. And for me, it's just very, very enlightening on how powerful what it is that, how powerful music and art is. So yes, I think it pushes me. I did not intend to become an activist, but I have learned that there's a way to use art as activism, music as activism. And so, I'm on that journey of learning. I'm on that journey of consistently sharing and listening and sharing to, I guess, many times if you see some of the work that I make, I was also telling Anne that it's not very complicated. And the goal of that is that if anyone sees it, they could also attempt to make it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Guys, I mean, we can't have any other time for these conversations. Guess what? I promise I will come.
For Climate Story Lab?
Definitely.
Okay.
I'll come over there, and then after that we
tune in online, right?
Oh yeah.
No, he's gonna be there physically.
I'm gonna be there physically.
Okay, yeah.
Guess what? I'll come over so we have these conversations on a deep level. Yes, Sandra, and I 30 minutes is not enough.
Yeah.
I'm actually starting to say it right now. Guess what? I'll join you. I promise, and I'll be there. We'll carry over this conversation so that we can see now the actual impact. These stories, what are they doing on the ground? Now, remember, you can also be a part of that. Any questions that you have, I know they've come in at Lookup TV across all your social media platforms. I'll be forwarding them to them directly so they can actually get to respond to some of them. Do you want to attend as well? Anne is right here. I'll answer those questions. In fact, Anne, I'll be asking for that poster so we can get it to run it from our station as well. Guess what? I'll see you tomorrow for another episode. This is Lookupbusiness. Guys, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
It was fantastic.